Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Space Mercenary Defense Force, an arena survival shoot 'em up. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Tom Paradise, Space Mercenary Defense Force originally released for PC in December of 2022. Now in May of 2024 from publisher East Asia Soft, it's available for the Xbox, the PlayStation 4 and 5, and the Nintendo Switch, which is the version we're looking at today. So this is yet another arena survival shooter. Basically think Vampire Survivors. There are definitely better examples in this particular game style. However, I do think there are some interesting elements that make this title worth looking at. Although overall, at least at the price point, I think it's worth it, but once again, there might be better titles to look at. So here we find ourselves at the main menu. So some of the things that I really like about this particular title are the ship customization and really just your weapon options you have available to you throughout the course of your run. So first, before we start a run, we're going to look at the hangar. So one of the key elements about an arena survival is that you're building currency for meta progression. In this case, there are a couple different meta progressions. There's modifiers, you have your astral upgrades, which are basically just your usual like increased damage, that sort of thing. But the part that's really interesting are the ship selections. There's 9 ships available. Initially we start with the Asterisk, and then you can unlock the additional ships with additional funds. The things that change with the ships is they each have their own unique stats, and those stats don't just include speed and your base turret as well as your health, but also the direction you can put modules you get, so basically your additional weapons, what direction they're facing, and that's very important in this game. So the Asterisk has 4 different slots we can slot weapons into, and they're each facing in their own direction. But one ship, like say the Mantis here, you have 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Or the Bishop changes that, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. But for our purposes, we'll show off the game just using the Asterisk. When you go to start, there are a couple options here. So initially, you have to complete a run before you can unlock turbo mode. This increases the speed of everything by 50%. Yourself, the enemies, shots, all of that, with the exception of not increasing your survival timer. We'll get to that in just a second. There's also challenges, which basically set these conditions and modifiers for a run, and it's kind of a fun way to experience the game. Selecting Classic, we start on our stage. Everything's relatively basic as far as graphics are concerned here. There are different planets, so you do get a different look that way, but for the most part, it's not that graphically interesting of a title. The enemies will always be the same as well. So we've already destroyed enough enemies and collected the coins, which are both our currency for the meta progression and our experience in the run, to level up. Now we can choose various upgrades. So we have a module we can choose from, the kinetic arrow module, which will basically lock onto an enemy, fire, and deal some decent damage. However, it's not my favorite, so we're going to aim for something else. So we can take the long range upgrade for our turret, and as you can see here, there's a path for the upgrades. You can see all the upgrades that will be coming for those upgrades. Even ones like taking the hill or this heads or tails has an upgrade path to it. So now our turret will be able to lock on to enemies from a further distance. That does have its advantage, as it's our only weapon at this point. There are a couple ships that do not have turrets, so for those, you unlock a module automatically when you start a run. So bouncing blade launcher is one I've never experienced, and so that is what I'm going to take for this particular run. I'm assuming something like this. Let's go ahead and throw it on the top slot of our ship. So now whenever the cooldown exits for that, you can kind of see a little cooldown bar on the module itself, it will fire at the enemies. In addition to the modules, there are other upgrades that we can purchase for the ship. Ones that'll upgrade our turrets, one that'll upgrade our speed. There's also some that will handle the damage itself. So now we have the option to get the mine deployment module, and this is one that I really like, especially some of the upgrades that we can take for it. So if you select this, you can look down and see that for the mine, it's got two branching paths here where you can either increase capacity or you can change the mine into this mine vortex, which is one of the paths that I've really enjoyed. In addition to that, at the end there's also the option to upgrade it to a synergy, provided you have the other required module. So if we can see the electrostatic generator, then we'll get that one. But for our purposes, we're going to take the mine. So one thing to note, some of the UI elements are a little bit weird on the consoles. So in order to select your weapon, you first select it from the menu here on the left, and then you have to scroll all the way down to the bottom to hit confirm. It would have been great if they just bound that to a different button. It kind of feels like it's expecting a mouse input for this kind of command. Selecting our upgrade, we're going to throw this mine layer on the bottom of the ship, and as you can see, it leaves mines in our wake. So one problem that exists, well actually a couple problems that exist with this game, is you're only able to orient your ship left or right on the screen. You can't actually point the nose of the ship in any direction, which is definitely a problem. So here we can continue to upgrade our saw blades, or there's a couple other options. We can get another saw blade option, but there's also this vamp scythe module. And looking at the description here, it summons a longer range scythe that launches forward, then swipes, healing half a heart after 250 kills. Anything that can get us additional health is useful in a survival game, so we'll pick this one, and we will throw this one on the, well no, let's go on the back of the ship. So one problem movement-wise is that the enemies all basically behave in a very similar pattern. There are one or two that change things up, but unlike a good styled arena survival game, there's not enough movement and AI to the enemies themselves for you to go and have a decent challenge with the enemies. You're basically hoarding the enemies behind you, so if you have anything that fires behind you or is more of a lock-on omnidirectional type weapon, that's what you want to go with. Along those lines, we have a couple interesting options here. We have this thermal hacking that we can light enemies on fire with, or there's this arrow clicker module. So there are a lot of modules that are kind of these jokes that seem like paint or browser accessories. So we're going to take that, throw it on the front. Once we have 4 modules, we can't get any additional modules, and it's not possible to swap the position of them. So you do have to be careful with your initial placement. We're going to increase our movement speed, and this is basically your progression as you move through the game. There will be certain events that will pop up. I'll grab that one here in just a moment, but in addition to that, we'll also see bosses come up at set intervals, as well as other special events that will happen at least once through a run. One problem with the bosses, it's always the same set of bosses. So after a few runs, you've kind of experienced what's there, and it does start to feel just a little stale. So for this particular event, we got a slot machine, and we did win a couple coins. So there'll be some basically additional experience for us. Not the best outcome, but not that bad either. So while the bosses are fixed, at one point throughout the course of your run, there is an environmental event that will occur, and that one can be random with several different outcomes. There's also the different like mini games events that can pop up, and there's a few elite mini bosses that you can potentially summon throughout the course of a run, as well as some objectives to, say, fill a meter by killing enough enemies in a certain area. And with some of the other astral upgrades that we can get, you can potentially put down these modules that if you're in the general vicinity of, they will power you up. So we'll keep on choosing the upgrades that select our, or that power up our modules, and hopefully we can see some decent options for, or we can at least get some branching options for some of our weapons, so you can kind of see a little bit of how that is. But at this point, I think you have a pretty good idea of the type of game Space Mercenary Defense Force is. It's not going to be the kind of shoot 'em up that's for everybody, and really, like, it's kind of one that it's best to just sit down and play through a run if you have something playing on in the background to kind of be distracting. It's just this nice kind of like zone out Zen style experience. Once again, we'll continue upgrading our weapon modules. Here's another one of the mini games. It's just simply choose heads or tails, then you flip the coin yourself based off of this meter. I haven't found anything that always guarantees a win or a loss. Then you can choose your reward, or you can do a double or nothing. Not being much of a gambler for this, we'll just take the reward. And we do have, we did actually pick up a synergy option here, bouncing blade mine conversion, which sounds epic, so we are going to pick that. So now our saw blade should be significantly more awesome, bouncing around and then exploding on contact, I'm assuming. Let's see if we can get an enemy to run into that. So at the 16-minute mark, we will encounter our first boss. You can kind of see a little bit of what's going on with that one. So generally, I would not recommend you take directional weapons with this particular game. However, bosses are the one exception to that, where a weapon that would, say, attach to the front of your ship and fire forward like a laser would be advantageous for bosses. This one does follow you around like the enemy horde, so that's less a problem with this one, but most of the others are more fixed positions, so you do have to be careful about your enemy, or your positional placement and your weapon placement. Unfortunately, I don't feel we've upgraded anything decently enough to make short work of this boss. If you have the right weapon combinations, this fight can actually go very, very quickly. Some that I've really enjoyed, the explosive homing weapons can be really fun. The one that lights enemies on fire is admittedly really enjoyable to use once it's powered up. Once the boss is done, we get a large crystal and we can continue to upgrade our weapons. And that basically is Space Mercenary Defense Force served up for your enjoyment. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, as I was saying, there is no variety to the bosses. You're always going to encounter the same bosses on every run, and that's definitely disappointing. In addition to that, there's not much variety with the enemies as well. You will largely see the same enemies on your runs as well. As you progress through the whole 20 minutes, you will see different enemies, especially towards the end of the run, but so far, at least with the ones that I've played, it's all been the same enemy progression. You start with those little slugs, you move on to the more green, like tentacle aliens. Ultimately, we end up with these kind of like not really face hugger, but the kind of that shape enemies going and like Futzy coming after us. But it just would have been nice to see some more varieties, or maybe some more stages added to the game itself. There is a little bit of issue with the movement. I think they did a good job of choosing a mid-ground with what you could do, having the ship only facing left or right, by having all the modules be directional, so you have the ones that are facing up, down, left, right, and then the different ships have different setups. There are some ships that all the modules will face towards the front of the ship, one in the front and the back, as I was going and showing. So there is some like nice variety there. And then just that one thing I was mentioning as another problem with the game is just that whole UI wonkiness being still kind of optimized for keyboard mouse kind of setup rather than console setup. It would be great if there was just another button to confirm your selection rather than having to select your module, then going and scrolling your cursor all the way down to the confirm to lock in your choice. But as far as the plus flavors are concerned, the weapon variety is very fun and quite deep. So you have a ton of weapons. I don't exactly know how many, but as far as the developer blurb is saying, there's 600 weapon upgrades. So I would assume that would include the weapons plus all their various upgrades. And that leaves a lot of options for what you could encounter. As far as even like this run, there have been weapons that I haven't seen on any other runs, so there is a lot of depth there. Then there's all the fun challenge modes, which will give you certain challenges to play against, as well as the unlocks, getting the other ships unlocked. There's different skins that you can unlock and purchase for the ships, as well as those celestial modifiers, which will further change the game. So at this point, the one that I've unlocked increases enemy health, but also increases your module damage kind of to match, but not quite. So it's giving yourself a greater challenge, but there's also some elements of powering you up as well. So at the end of the day, although I do feel that there are better arena survival titles out there, such as Vampire Survivor, I don't think that Space Mercenary Defense Force would be a bad title to look at if you've already experienced those other titles, and maybe you could go and find it on just a small sale like its initial opening week sale. And with that brings us to the end of this week's Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.